So if we haven't met before, I'm Sheila. I'm the president and COO of Signet Education. I kind of do everything here, and I also serve as a subject matter expert on pretty much everything that we do. So you'll see my face a lot in these sorts of presentations. If you don't know Signet, we're a full service education consulting company where we do test prep, executive function coaching, college admissions, which we're here to talk about tonight, and subject tutoring. We also do graduate admissions for older students as well. And tonight we're here to talk about how to build a college list. I think people stress out about this part of the process for the wrong reasons. And I also think that this is the part of the process where you can be the most strategic and have so much control over what the rest of the process is going to look like that people don't invest enough time in it. So I'm really glad that you decided to take some time out of your evening tonight to learn about how we do this here at Signet and get some free tools and advice on how you could go about doing this with your student. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I think I have to do this one, this whole window. Is that right? Actually, I'm just going to do the whole screen just in case. And you should see a slideshow, which I'm going to turn on right now. Okay, great. Thank you for the headline, Kate. So how to build a stellar college list. I like to qualify that because you could build any kind of college list. You could build a kind of mediocre one. You could build one that's full of reaches and very ambitious. But what we want to do is create one that's the right list for your student. And nobody can tell you that except for your student. So that's one of the things that we're going to focus on is how to figure out what they actually want out of their college experience so that you can help them identify colleges that will meet those needs. And I always say that college list should be inspiring. It should be exciting and feel like, oh, wow, you're going to go to great places. But it should also be realistic in a couple of ways. We want to make sure these are colleges that are appropriate for your child. Your child's not going to go and fail out or get overwhelmed, or a college where it's just going to be so easy that they're not going to grow. So we want it to be appropriate for them. We also want the list to be the right size so that you're not overextending them in the number of applications, essays that they have to fill out and write. So not too few, not too many, but Goldilocks here. We got to get it just right. And that's going to be a little different for every student, but I'm going to give you some general guidelines here as to how to navigate all of that. So with that, we'll dive into our agenda for the evening. First, we have to determine what you are looking for. And this you really serves two purposes. You as a parent, what do you want for your child? What do you know they need? And what do they want? What is important to your child? What's motivating to them? We'll talk about that. We will review some tools that you can use for researching colleges. I'm going to give you some of my favorites. I'm going to show you one of them in particular that I think is overlooked and very useful. We're going to think about defining the scope of your college list. I'm going to help you create a draft list and know how to refine that list into your final list, and then how to organize all of this so that it's not overwhelming, that you have kind of a punch list to work through, a place to keep all of the information organized, and all of the links to the millions of Google documents that will eventually come out of this process so that you aren't scrambling to figure out, where did I put that one essay that I drafted? And then I'm going to save lots of time for your questions as well. I'm going to be switching between the presentation and then worksheets that I will send out to you after this session is over. So, don't worry about capturing everything. I'm going to send you the slides. Obviously, there's going to be a recording as well. And then you'll get the resources that you can actually use with your kids. So we start with understanding what your kid wants. And it's important to remember that this is their process and their life. Now, they don't always know what's best for them, and they may not always be the best at, following all the steps and completing all the tasks. But It is their college experience and their future that they are building towards. So you want to put them at the center of this process as much as possible. And for a million different reasons, some kids are just not ready for that. They're scared of it, they feel too much pressure, or they're just not mature enough to be thinking about what comes after high school. And so a parent will obviously have to be involved, may have to step in and do a little bit more of the legwork. But at every step of this process, I do encourage you to think about, what can I give to my student so that they feel like this is their process, that they're in control, that they are making decisions, even if they're not having the final say on something, right? Give them some piece to own and gradually increase that, so that as this process proceeds, they are owning more and more of it. And you are there as an advisor instead of a coordinator or an executor of the tasks. So, in that same spirit, what a student wants out of their college experience has to really be driven by what they want, not what you want for them, though that's a piece of it, and not what their friends want. And I know we're dealing with teenagers here, and it seems like everything they want is because some friend mentioned it or they heard about somebody else doing it. And so it can be really hard to separate what's important to them versus, what's them trying to be cool, or keep up with someone that they really want to impress. So we like to do an exercise that we call the personal college inventory, that I'm going to show you in a second. And what I recommend is that you and maybe a partner go through this on your own, or maybe you do two separate versions for each parent, and you have the student do this as well, maybe in separate rooms, maybe even on separate days. And then at some point you come together to compare notes, because you'll learn a lot about what each other is prioritizing in the process. And it can open up some really wonderful conversations where you can share your own college experiences, or you can connect them to a friend of yours who went to this or that college, and they can learn firsthand what this thing they think they want really looks like. It will open some avenues of communication that maybe are not there right now, or maybe could be better. Think about doing that exercise as a family activity. And here, let me just do this. Okay, you see this worksheet? Yes. Okay, great. This is our personal college inventory. It's very simple, but it does take you through kind of examples of what these different categories or preferences might mean. And we like to start really broad. So you'll see we start with area of the country. Some kids want to get as far away from home as they can, or they have certain medical needs that mean they need to stay within a certain climate or within a certain distance from home or where their medical practitioner is. So this is a great place to start. I get a lot of students who are like, I'll go to New England or the West Coast and nothing in between. What they don't realize is that there are some really great colleges in those flyover states, which I happen to be from one of them, that they should absolutely look at, especially if we're trying to think about where are the colleges that are a great fit for the student, because those are the colleges where the student has the best chances. And I'm sure you all know, part of the reason you're here is how crazy this process is. It's so selective. Even the most amazingly talented students don't get into some colleges. So you really do want to make sure you have a balanced list that has a mix of those really tough reach schools that everybody wants to go to, one or two safeties. We'll talk about this in a minute. And then a good number of target schools. And some of those schools may be in geographic regions that your student wouldn't first think of when you ask them where they want to go to college. But they can still have a really great college experience there, and maybe it still checks all the other boxes. So I encourage you to have a little flexibility about the location if that's something that's possible given the logistics of your student. We talk about climate. And one of the reasons we talk about this is I want students to think about college as a place that they're going to live for the next 4 or 5 years, not just a place that they're going to go to college and have this fun academic experience away from home. When you start thinking about it as a place that you're going to live, you start thinking about other things that matter. Like, what is the weather like when you don't have a car and you need to walk, on foot to whatever place you need to get to. What's distracting for you? What's uncomfortable for you? Do you get seasonal depression? Do we need to stay away from a place that is, dark and stormy 8 months out of the year? These are really important things for a student to reflect on and think about honestly. And yes, you are going to get a student who's like, yeah, I want to go somewhere tropical. I want to go to the University of Hawaii, not knowing anything about, what that school has to offer, or really what it would be like to live in a place like Hawaii year round. It's not a vacation all year round. But it's a place for discussion, right? They might go there first, but you'll pull them back to a little bit more reality. And then we start to get in the type of setting, right? Is it a busy city, a downtown campus? Is it in the suburbs? Is it off in the woods somewhere? Different students have different preferences just based on what they like to do in their free time, or the kind of people they want to be around, or opportunities they want to take advantage of. If your student really loves learning in a hands-on situation or learning on a job, well, you want them to be in a place that has those opportunities around. So that might mean being in a suburb or a major city, as opposed to one of these more kind of remote locations. So think about that. We go through size. We go through types of schools with descriptions of what they are, and then certain things about the student body, the academics, what kind of activities the student wants to be able to participate in, and then even something about financial aid, which your student might not understand what the financial aid situation is, or how much your family might be looking for. But this is a place, again, for that kind of discussion. And then we encourage them to rank their preferences. What's a deal breaker? What's most important to you out of all of these things that you just went through? What matters the most to you? And parents should do this as well. And then again, compare the notes and see what comes up for you. And then what you're going to want to do is take the information that you hopefully get onto the same page about after you've gone through the exercise. You can take it to any one of these search engines that I'm going to show you, I think, on the next slide, and really just plug in your preferences and get back out an initial list. So let's go back to the presentation and look at that. All right. So there are a lot of different resources that are available to you for this part of the process of, now I know what I'm looking for. How do I go find the schools that match those preferences or needs? Your school district probably has a contract with Naviance or SCORE. If you haven't heard those terms before, it may not be because your school doesn't have a contract with them. Sometimes they only give you access to these tools in the spring of your junior year. So they may just not have given you access to it. There are several other platforms that do this kind of work. What they are computer portals, website portals that you go into, and you can research about schools, their data, the kind of programs they have. You can also see historical data of applicants from your high school and what it's very rudimentary, what their test scores and their GPA was, and whether they were accepted, rejected, waitlisted at the specific schools you're looking at. So obviously you'll look at national statistics as well, but then you can see your own high school's history and relationship with various colleges that might be on your list. And that can be very helpful context for knowing how you stack up against the typical applicants from your high school to that college. Big Future is the College Board's big college search engine. It is totally free to use. You just need to have a College Board free account to look at it, and it will take you through a couple of parameters where you can check off areas of the country, types of majors you're looking for, size, all of that, and it will spit back out colleges, give you data on those colleges, and link to their direct websites as well. Niche.com does almost exactly the same thing. I find the Niche interface a little bit better, and you can get a little more granular with the kinds of majors you're interested in on Niche more than Big Future. And of course, your student doesn't have to know what they want to major in, but if they have a couple of interests, you're going to want to make sure those are all represented at the schools that you're looking at. So Niche can be really great for finding that. College Results is the one that I want to show you in a second. It uses government data to tell you, a lot of really valuable statistics about every college. And there's a really cool similar school search tool that can be very helpful. And then I like to include one print guide in case you or your kid is the kind of person who just likes paging through something. The FISC guide is really the best one of these. It's a huge book, and there are pages on every single college where you can see reviews and the data. Some of them have pictures. And so you can just kind of work your way through that book to find the colleges that you like. And, I want to encourage you to keep an open mind. This is still the very first stages of exploration. You do not have to have the perfect school yet. And really, what I think is happening at this stage is validating the preferences that you've come up with. Right? You said you like a school that's 15,000 or bigger. Well, let's look at a couple of them and see how you feel about that size. And then that size preference might change based on what they see in that big school category. So think about it that way. Keep an open mind. Most of my students who get to this point of the process have 50 or 60 schools on their list. So we still have a lot of work to do to narrow it down, but we're starting really broad. So let me show you that tool of collegeresults.org. So what you see here, I'm going to have to minimize my own screen, is a number of ways that you can filter what you're looking for. So like most search engines, you have, different options. You can put in, the size of the school. This platform uses a lot of really rich data. So if you care about how many students are enrolled in distance education as a measure of something in college, you can filter by that. You can filter by admissions rate, whether tests are required or not, the demographic qualities of the class, the outcomes, right? How many, what percentage of by demographic area, what are the graduation rates, the debt, which I think is very important to keep in mind. But beyond that, you could also throw in a name. Let's take Colby College. Just had a student get accepted there, so it's on my mind. Did I do something wrong? Oh, here it is. Okay, it's just way zoomed out. Okay, here's Colby. If you click on the school, you get all of that data for that particular school, which is fantastic. And then if you click compare the institution and you click the list tab, you see all of these peer institutions, which suggests that if you like Colby, you will probably also like these. And now they're not all exactly the same, slightly different sizes, definitely different acceptance rates here. We've got a all women's college on here. We've got a bunch of other things here. But they're, and, I'll also point out that, this one, Swarthmore, is right outside of Philly, whereas Dartmouth is far more remote, right? Or, Barnard is in the middle of New York City. So you get a variety in there, but there are certain characteristics that make them similar. So if you have a student who really falls in love with the school and you want to find more options like that school, but maybe something different about it, either a different setting, a different size, a different admissions rate, which I think is a really important one to consider, this is a great tool for finding those things. So you can find that list, and then you could click in to the data for them, or you can collect a few different ones that you want to look at and compare them side by side based on all of this really rich data, right? Now, I love this stuff, but this is my field. So I definitely understand if this feels overwhelming to you. You do not need to go into this much detail for every school. I will show you what I think is important for you to track when we get to our spreadsheet. You don't need to know every single thing, but some people care about very specific things. So let's go back into the slideshow. And we will talk about making your first college list. So you can plug those, like I said, preferences in and get an initial list out. It's really important also to consider selectivity when you're building your college list. You can't have a list that is all reach schools, which mean the average GPA, the average test scores, the rigor of the curriculum for the students who tend to be admitted to those schools are above where your student is. You have target schools where they're right in line with what your student has achieved. And then you have likely schools, some people call them safety schools, where we're fairly certain your student is going to get in because their GPA, their test scores, their activities and profile tend to be higher than the students who are typically admitted there. And you want a mix of both. And we'll talk about what the proportion should be. But what I like to use is this GPA chart, which again, I will share with you. What we've done is taken the average GPA and plotted it against the average SAT section score out of 800 or ACT composite score, so that you can just kind of pick off a grid what category of school is going to be a target for your student. So let's say you've got a kid with 600s on the verbal and the math section of the SAT, and they have a 3.4 unweighted GPA. That puts us right here in this competitive plus category. And this worksheet that I'll give you has a list of, all of these different categories. So you can see what schools kind of fall into that category. And then the rule would be if the colleges that they're interested in fall into, one of these other categories, that would be a reach school for them. If it falls into, a lower category, then that's the safety or likely schools for them. Again, this is very rudimentary. Scores and grades are only two parts of the profile that a student will submit to a college. And at many schools, they're not even looking at test scores anymore. We will talk about that. But it's a kind of quick and dirty way to judge if your student can make it at one of those schools. And I mean, not just get in, but also succeed in their 4 years there. So it's a great place to start, but then you've got to get into the more nuanced research to make sure it's a good fit, right? So we will send this to you as we wrap up. And using all of that, the preferences, the research that you've done, the selectivity, kind of charting that you've done, you want to make yourself a spreadsheet. And I'm going to show you what the spreadsheet that I like to use with students looks like. And this is something I'll send out to you. You can make a copy of it and use it for your own kid. You'll see there are a lot of categories here. And typically, we'll fill in the college name. Obviously, you got to look at the college. You'll fill in the category. Enthusiasm level we'll come back to in a minute. But from deadlines over to setting, this is stuff that's going to come out of one of those search engines that gives you all the data on the schools. And this is the data that I think is most important for you to keep top of mind for your student. Not all of the, graduation rates by demographic or the debt ratios and all of that. Though, again, I can imagine some people might find that stuff really helpful. You want to know what the deadlines are. What's the average GPA of the last year's freshman class, the average ACT or SAT, depending on which your student is going to take, if they are testing at all, the acceptance rate, the student body size, and what kind of setting the college is in. And then there's lots of other columns that I'll take you through in a second to capture the more nuanced things that make the school a fit for your student. But at minimum, these categories can help us see patterns in things that students are liking and have a really quick assessment of what are their chances. And I don't mean chances like they have a 97% chance of acceptance, but that selectivity category, right? If it's got a low acceptance rate and high GPA, high ACT score, that's going to be a reach college, right? Even students who have perfect test scores and perfect grades, some of those schools are reaches for everybody, no matter what their stats are. But then, you want to be able to see over time as this list gets more fleshed out and more finalized, that you have a variety of acceptance rates in there, a variety of ACT, SAT scores or GPAs that encompass where your students is. But the things that should stay the same are some of these things in columns J and over, right? They should have majors that the student likes. Again, they don't have to wed themselves to one. But if they know, for example, it's going to be in the humanities over the hard sciences, that's important to look at, right? They can actually go to the college website and look at the departmental pages for some of the things they think they might be interested in, to verify, yeah, this sounds cool. I like the learning outcomes here. I like the people who teach in this department. I would enjoy these kinds of classes. And as they find things that they like, I encourage my students to just drop a link into the spreadsheet, drop a link to that department page or the course description, the specific course that you like, the professor's profile, the clubs that you would want to join, because we want to imagine your life outside of class on these colleges. And then any special opportunities, it could be study abroad programs, undergraduate research, special library collections, anything that really strikes their fancy that they find on the college's website. And then I also encourage them to take a look to see what they can find about the academic philosophy of a school. And I'll give you an example about what I mean here. Most colleges say something like, we're preparing the leaders of tomorrow, something like that, very inspirational. But what I'm really after is, what do they think it's important for you to learn? And this has a little more to do with the requirements than what they say their mission is. In some places, you'll find it in the mission, like Northeastern University, for example, talks a lot about hands-on learning. And that's clearly part of their curriculum with their co-op program. So that's an important thing to note about a school like Northeastern. Other examples would be like Brown University is famous for its open curriculum, where you'll do a major, but outside of that major, they do not care what classes you take. They are not going to give you any guidelines about you need to take this much math, this much foreign language, this much history, or anything like that. It's totally open. And on the opposite end of that spectrum would be a school like Columbia University or maybe University of Chicago that has a very rigid core curriculum where everybody is taking the same class or very similar classes. And in between on that spectrum, you might have a college that has a more flexible core curriculum or what they might call distribution requirements. You have to take 2 classes within this vertical or 1 class within this vertical to make sure that their students are learning what they consider to be the important pieces of knowledge and skill to be a well-rounded contributing citizen, whatever their goal is for what they do with their students. And then if there are other things that students like that just don't fit into one of these categories, I encourage them to write that here. On a lot of occasions, if they go on a tour of the school and they hear something really cool from a tour guide, or they saw some really cool building, they had a chance to talk to a professor or a student, I want them to capture that here. And then teenagers are really good at telling you what they don't like. Sometimes they're a little hesitant to tell you what they do like. But if you ask them, what do you hate about this campus? They'll have a million things to say. And it's important to capture that too, because if it ends up being a deal breaker and this exists at another campus, well, then there's no point in visiting that campus or even doing the research on that campus. Or if everything else about this school is perfect except for this one thing, well, then you can use that similar institution tool that I showed you to find maybe the school that is similar enough but avoids this one thing that they really dislike, right? So keep track of that as well. And the reason I encourage my students to be so detailed in their research and keep track of all of these things is, number one, as they research more and more colleges, they're all going to blend together. It's very hard to keep them straight. So you want to document it somewhere so you can see that. Number two is, if they decide they're going to apply to this college, the entire purpose of the college application is to argue why I, as a student, am a match for you as a college. And this is what they want to hear, right? It's not going to end up in your main essay, which goes to all of the colleges. But if the college requires a supplemental essay or has an interview process, these are the things that your student is going to want to mention that shows they've done their research. They are truly enthusiastic about this school, and they can say, hey, I have done this thing for 4 years in high school where I don't know, ran an environmental science club or a conservation club, let's say, and your university has 7 programs related to environmental science and policy, and this is exactly what I want to do with my life. And there's literally no better place to do it than your program, because I'm going to take advantage of, this study abroad opportunity. I'm going to do research with this professor on this topic that I've already done some work on. You can say things like that, which really do make a student stand out and help a college have confidence that you do want to go there, which is one of the things they're checking for. And also help you avoid saying the generic things that everybody else is going to say. This is how you differentiate yourself. Instead of saying, oh, I like NYU because I love New York City. Well, hello, there are lots of other colleges in New York City, right? And there are going to be 100 million other students saying those things, right? You really need to say something that only you can say about only that college. And this research is how you figure that out. So if you're going to do the research in the first place to build the list, keep that research so that if you do apply to that college, you have it at your fingertips. And I'll show you how to organize that on the next tab. I want to come back to this enthusiasm level. I started doing this with my students about 3 years ago because, they can fill in all of these columns and get into the specifics, but they have a hard time translating that into one general feeling about a college. But when I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy would you be if this was your college? They can answer that question. So after they do all the research and I talk through it with them, I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy would you be here? And it's not, do you think you're going to get in? Who else is there? How cool is the school? It's really, how happy would you be if this was your life? They're able to give me that. And here we've got low, medium, high. I like 1 to 10. Some students like 1 to 5. But I think that enthusiasm is an important piece of this to capture. And of course, you can modify the spreadsheet as you like. You could add a column for whether we visited, what date we visited, any notes and pictures from the visit you could link in here. And that could be very helpful also in keeping things organized. Let me pause to get a sip of water and take any questions if anything has come up.
Yeah, Sheila, I have a question, and feel free to say that you want to save this for the end, but I was particularly with respect to size, which to me seems like a super important component of the college experience. I don't know how to convey those tiers, help my kid differentiate between what would it be like to be at a 2,000 versus a 6,000 versus a 15,000 size population school.
That's a great question. I think there are a couple things you could do. One is talk about what it's like to be in a crowd and what it's like to have resources spread a little bit more thinly. So at these bigger schools, you have less advising. It's just harder to do at that scale, right? So students who go to UCLA, University of Michigan, UT Austin, they have to be able to figure things out for themselves or advocate for themselves enough to go and find an advisor to get an answer to whatever their question is about what classes do I need to take or what requirements I need to fill. If you're at a much smaller school, you're going to have an advisor that knows you by your first name, right? And they're going to come after you and say, hey, we need to pick your classes for next semester. Let's set up a meeting, right? So, you could demonstrate it in those ways. Another way to do it, I think, is a little bit more immediate, is just visit some schools of those varying sizes in your local area, like within a 1 or 2 hour drive. It doesn't matter if your student would ever even consider going to that school, but you can go. You don't have to take an official tour. You can just go and walk around on a day that class is in session and see what that looks like, see what that feels like. I went to Harvard as an undergrad, which is about 6,000 undergrads. It was very manageable. But I went to Indiana University as a grad student. And holy moly, let me tell you, trying to get across the quad when it was, class change time was like fighting like a salmon swimming upstream. It was just impossible to get through the throngs of undergrads, coming towards me to get to my class. So if they can experience that a little bit for themselves, they're going to get it. Great. I hope that was helpful. It was a great question. All right, so let's move on to sort of next step in the process, which is you have this giant list, and now you've got to narrow it down because not all 60 or 70, whatever on your initial list, are going to be true fits. Um, you know, Parents might have feelings about them, students might have feelings about them. So there might be some conflict around what really does belong on the list. And then beyond that, you also need to be realistic about how much work this is going to be. So, in my experience, I've been doing this for a long time. There is just no way to send in high quality applications to more than 15 colleges. So that's where my list tops out. And I tell my students, like, look, if you really want to apply to more than 15, you can do that. But I do not endorse that strategy because you are going to spread yourself thin. You're going to say the same thing to more than one college, and they're going to be able to tell that it's not as authentic or that you didn't spend as much time on this essay as you could have to make it really compelling and just really sing out in your true voice. So I encourage you to keep it tight. Narrow it down to no more than 12 to 15 schools. And generally, I say 2 to 3 safety schools, 6 to 8 target schools, and 3 to 4 reach schools. Right? You never want to stop a student from applying to a school that they just are enamored with, but you do want to diversify this portfolio and protect yourself from the risk of maybe not getting into any school if you put too many eggs in that one basket. So break it up a little bit. And what you'll see is that every one of those schools should be a great fit. They should be happy to go to any of those schools. And the real difference in them is the selectivity, not in the programs that are offered or in maybe not the size or anything like that. They should really check all the boxes for preferences. It's just that some are more selective than others. And then, really do open up the discussion. There will be disagreements. We find it is best to listen with an open mind, even if the idea is ridiculous. Listen. I always encourage my students who are really sold on a school, but their parents are not. I say, do your research, figure out why this is the best option for you. And try to articulate that to your parents because that's good practice for when you need to write that essay. So I try to encourage that as much as possible. And also remember that this is just the list, right? The list can change. Also, just because you apply doesn't mean you have to go. And this is one point in the process where a student is really in control, and they're going to feel like they're not in control for a good portion of their senior year waiting for these decisions. So maybe you want to let them have their, one college that you think is a terrible idea, but they are really excited about it. Choose your battles, let them have something. And then you can have that fight, if it's going to be a fight, when they get their acceptances. All right. And then I wanted to touch on testing strategy because, as you all know, most colleges went test optional over the course of the pandemic. Many were test optional even before the pandemic. There were, I think, 1,300 schools that were test optional before the pandemic even started. And now it's something like 1,900 or something, maybe over 1,800. And some schools that went test optional during the pandemic decided to make their test optional policies permanent, meaning you can apply with or without SAT or ACT scores, and they will not disadvantage you. Some colleges decided, no, we really need to bring this back because it helps us make a meaningful decision about whether a student can succeed at our university. So Purdue brought this back. MIT brought it back. A lot of the schools in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee have reinstituted their test requirements. So you want to pay attention to what the school's policies are as you're building your list, depending on what your students' testing strengths or not strengths are. So I recommend, if you have a sophomore, I recommend just doing some practice tests to see if testing is going to be a strength for them. Because if they can score above a college's average, we have seen that submitting that score will actually help them in the process. So if they have strong scores relative to the college, they should submit. But there are some students where testing is just not their strength, and that's fine. And there are many pathways for them. But the other pieces of the application end up becoming more important if you do end up going test optional, meaning you're not going to submit test scores. So I like to have people investigate this question at the end of sophomore year so that if you do decide you're going to go test optional, you have enough time to work on grades, take extra rigorous courses, build very strong relationships with your teachers, do more extracurricular activities, take on leadership roles, community service. You have time to actually do that instead of deciding spring of junior year when you have, 3 to 6 months before applications need to be turned in. So get an early read on that. And if you have questions about that, certainly I'm happy to talk to you about it. But it's also really important to know what the current policy is, because some of these colleges that decided to go test optional said until 2023, we will be test optional, and they have not announced what they're going to do for next year or the year after that. Some of them have announced, all the way till 2026. And some of them we're just waiting. So we don't know yet. So in the case that your student's dream school requires tests, you need to know that ahead of time so that you have enough time to prep for the test and get the score that you want. So take a look at that as you're building out this list. I think it's also really important to take note of the college's super score policy. So a super score is when a student takes a test multiple times, but the college will take the highest section scores across all administrations and combine them as though they were taken in one sitting. So if they take the SAT, they really did well in the verbal section the first time, but not so well in the math. They take it a second time, their math score goes up. They're going to take that higher verbal score and the higher math score and put them together. Now, vast majority of colleges do super score. There are differences in terms of which colleges super score the SAT versus super score the ACT. There are some colleges that will do one but not the other, and it seems very unfair to me, but this is what their policy is. And there are some colleges that don't super score at all. So you want to be aware of that as you embark on this testing journey so you know what you're aiming for. I'll give you an example. I have a student right now who I know is a great fit for the ACT. She took it, got a good score, not as good as she was practicing. And so she's been retaking it, and she really wants to go to Georgetown, and Georgetown super scores the SAT, but not the ACT. So now she's looking at taking an SAT, even though that's not where her true strength lies. Because if she has to take it multiple times, she knows that's going to work in her favor at Georgetown, whereas her ACT is not at Georgetown. So unfortunately, like, one school can dictate all of this stuff that you end up having to do. And of course, I'm talking to that student about, are we really sure Georgetown is worth all of this effort? And so far she has deemed it so. But that's why I like to point this out, because it can really change what you end up doing and how your student ends up investing their time. All right, so let's move to refining this list. There are lots of ways you can refine it. Certainly doing the research and logging their enthusiasm is a great way to do that. Visiting the campuses is another way to do that, because sometimes it just feels right or feels wrong. So I'll give you an example. When I was applying to college, I was so gung-ho about MIT, Brown, and then Harvard in that order. I don't know why. I was 17. But MIT was my first choice. And I did a visit with my family, and we went to MIT in the morning in November. It was raining and gray. And any of you who have seen MIT's campus, no offense to MIT, it's a fantastic school, but it doesn't look that good in the rain. And I was like, oh, wow, I don't know if I can handle this. We had lunch. We went to Harvard in the afternoon, and I swear to you, as soon as we stepped onto Harvard Yard, the sun came out, all the trees were glistening, and I was like, this is my place. And so, yes, I was 17, and that is a totally superficial reason to choose a school. But it did change things for me. And then Brown was on my list as well. We went to visit, and something just didn't feel right about it. And I still applied, but I knew that it just wasn't going to be in my top choices. So, trust your gut is what I like to say is when you go on campus. Your body is picking up on something that you may not be able to articulate yet. And maybe it's about the weather, but it's important to listen to or at least register. Consider the logistics of getting to and from each school. Like, is this a plane ride away? Is this a bus and a train? Is this a long drive? Who's doing that drive? How often are they going to be able to get home? And how important is that to you? Over the pandemic, we saw a lot of people kind of just contract. Right? We want to keep our kids close in case something scary like this happens again. And that's having real impacts on the numbers of students that are applying to different types of schools in their own regions, and also causing colleges to want to reach out and recruit, offer merit scholarships to students who live in different regions so that they can kind of diversify their pool as well. I have a lot of students who want to go to all the great colleges in the Northeast, and they end up getting merit scholarships to those great colleges in the flyover states that I was talking about because they're trying to attract them. And then I've said this before, but really try to have your student imagine their life there. What does it look like outside of the classes and the diploma they might get? Like, what does your daily life look like? Are you going to go to the gym? Are there clubs that you want to join? Who are your friends going to be? What are you going to do if you want to hang out off of campus? What's there for you? So take a kind of more holistic look at the environment, and then you could always do more research. And I do have hold on, I gotta find it. This one, top questions when researching a school. These are a lot more detailed than the ones that are on the spreadsheet. And if you're really having trouble deciding whether a college stays on the list or not, these are the kind of questions you really want to dig into. So this will also be sent out afterwards. Okay, I want to break for questions. I think I saw a hand raised. Ilana, can you come off mute and ask us your question?
Yes. Hi, Sheila.
Hi,
I have
nice
a
to see you.
question about super scoring.
Mm-hmm.
So, like Nadav took the ACT last month or whatever, and um, and he got a 30, and he which is not what he was hoping for, but like, he got a perfect score in one section, English
Awesome.
section,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't do so well in math. So he signed up to take it again in a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, he's kind of like, well, I don't really need to do well on that reading section because I got a perfect score. Like, can I just sort of, fill in all C's
Yeah.
and chill out and be more refreshed to do the math?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, like, do colleges look down on that? Or is that, like, it feels like you could really play the system here and
You
keep
could.
on taking the ACT until you get the score you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first is check to see that the schools on your list actually do accept an ACT super score, because that might be your answer right there.
Right. But like, he was looking up a few schools, he's sitting here and they do.
And they do. That's great. Okay. So I wouldn't recommend just filling in all C's and like taking a nap. I would recommend going through the section, but not stressing about it because it doesn't matter. Right. I have actually asked admissions officers, what happens when a student super scores? Like, do you get all the scores and then you put the super score together? What they get is a digital file that comes from the ACT that populates their admissions software that only shows them the highest scores in each section and does not tell them, was this all taken at once or not? So schools don't know. And the admissions officer I talked to was like, I wouldn't even know how to find that out if I wanted to, because they're interfacing with the software.
So why do you recommend to actually do the reading section, for instance, and tire out your brain when they're never going to see it?
Well, I don't recommend tiring out your brain. Like, take it easy, but I don't think you should just mail it in, because you want to stay, I mean, this is like testing strategy. You want to stay vigilant throughout that entire test. And you don't want to be like sleeping, letting your attention wane. You really need to keep that sharp. Right. So use the break for that kind of thing. But certainly you could just leave the last passage blank. But, on the ACT, the reading section is so similar to the science section. The reading section could actually be really great practice for the science section in a sort of no pressure way. And then you could take a few minutes at the end of the reading section to stretch, close your eyes, whatever you need to do to really reset. But I wouldn't recommend just mailing it in.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could talk more about that too if you want. We could do it offline though. Great. Other questions while we're on this little break? Got a question about AP results, which I think is probably a good one to think about. So the question is, do AP test scores contribute to admissions decisions? And then they do. But NACAC, which is the National Association, of College Admissions Counselors, does a survey every year of its member institutions to see what they think is the most important or are the most important factors in the admissions process. And pretty consistently, AP scores rank somewhere between 12 and 16. So they're not all that important. They're probably not going to be the make or break decision for your student, though they can be helpful if you feel there are weaknesses in the application and you want to show actually they really do know this material. A great AP score can help a college, put that together. Or if the student has real strengths in an area and wants to show, look at me, I'm so great at European history. You take the AP Euro exam. AP courses are valuable in that they tend to be the most rigorous courses a high school offers, and colleges value rigor. So the first 4 factors in college admissions that this NACAC survey has deemed most important is the GPA, the course rigor, and then test scores if they're used, and then it's like essays and all the rest of the stuff. So that's why APs end up being pushed, but it's really shouldn't be thought of as like a how many APs can I fit in kind of thing. All right, let's get back to refining and organizing our list. So as you refine this list down to your final 12 to 15 schools, what I recommend is turning this research spreadsheet that I've been showing you into a sort of priority organizing project management tool, right? It's going to have due dates, whether the student's applying early action or early decision, specific other application requirements, maybe a link to the actual application portal if it's not the college or not the Common App. So let me show you what that looks like. Here's your research list. And then you've got this other tab here that's the finalized list. Now, these categories right here are, well, all the way to here, are the same. So you can just copy this right over from your research list. But then we get into the actual application phase over here. So what I recommend is creating a Google folder with all of the important documents that you need for that school, usually your essays. I typically recommend one Google document per school, but some students, for whatever reason, like a different document for each essay. Put it all in a folder so you don't lose it. And then I have my students put in what's the first supplemental question and what's its word count. And there's spaces for 8 supplemental questions here. Yes, there are some schools that ask up to 8, even more supplemental questions. So keep that in mind as you build your list. Some schools are going to require more work from you than others. And the reason I have them do this whole section here is because there are only so many questions that a college can ask. Most of them are going to ask, why do you want to go to this school? Or what do you think of our mission statement? Or what are your areas of academic interest? Or tell us about a meaningful extracurricular activity that you do. And if you lay all of these out for your 12 to 15 schools, you're going to see those overlaps. And I have my students color code them and highlight them. So you could say, all right, well, here are all my questions. I'm going to use this one essay that's on my extracurricular activity for these 6 schools. And yes, they will have different word counts and you're going to have to tailor them to each school, but they can follow the same sort of template once you write it once. And that will really make your writing work a lot more efficient. And you have an opportunity to write something really strong once and then tailor it, which is easier than writing from scratch every single time. All right. So that's what I like to do. And I do have students who hate spreadsheets. What I do is I keep the spreadsheet and then I send them, here's the document that we're working on today. or here are the documents that you need to deal with. Sometimes I will translate this into a Google document for them where everything is just linked in the Google document. But most of the time, I like to have a spreadsheet so I can see a clear overview of where we are. And then you could even color code things based on what's done, what's not done, what's a priority, or any other piece of that writing process or the application material collecting process or the application form process. So I have one of these spreadsheets for every single one of my students. They know we're going to look at it every time. And whether they hate spreadsheets or not, I tell them, at some point in your college career or your actual working career, you're going to have to get to know how to use a spreadsheet. So might as well learn it now. So that's what we do with this. And then as you're finalizing this list, and usually I like to see a list sort of finalized by the end of June of junior year, you want to get some second opinions here. Now, your high school counselor should absolutely have a say in what colleges go on this list. They may not be to the point of taking things off or adding things, but they may have ideas for you, or they may be able to give you helpful context. So definitely talk to your high school college counselor with this. Beside a parent looking at the list, somebody else that you trust that has your students' best interests at heart could be very helpful too. And it should be someone who actually knows something about this process. So maybe an older cousin who recently went through the process, or if you have a family friend who is involved in education, or if you know me, all of you know me now, I'm happy to take a look at your students' college list, no charge, just to help you think through what else you might need to be doing here to refine it. Get someone else to look at it, because it can be very easy to get lost in the weeds here. And sometimes that second opinion can be really helpful. All right, I am going to stop my screen share now, and we are going to dedicate, the last 2 minutes. I can stay longer if anybody needs to more questions here. So what do we got? I'm opening up my chat here. Okay. All right, I have a direct message. What advice would I give for homeschool students in terms of building a college list? Test optional for homeschoolers is a little bit nuanced. Maybe Kristen, you and I could just have a separate call about that. But there are schools that are test optional all around, because the reason schools went test optional during the pandemic is that no one could actually take a test. So it wasn't like a thing that mattered on whether you're homeschooled or not. So I believe there are schools that are test optional still for homeschoolers. But I would say, especially for a homeschool student who might not know what it's like to be in a classroom with a lot of other kids, seeing colleges will be very, very helpful. And even sitting in on classes, which many colleges will allow you to do, could be very helpful in terms of orienting them to that experience and helping them identify those preferences.
If you say you've put in for an early action,
Mhm.
but then the rest of your applications, you maybe haven't heard back yet or want to do the other
I
application,
see.
is there benefit to getting ahead and doing it before the end of December?
If the college has rolling admissions, then yes, the earlier the better. Now, there are very few colleges that still have rolling admissions. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter. They're not going to start reviewing applications until after the deadline. So it's just going to sit there. I have a question about financial aid decisions, and if they come out with the early decision acceptance. Most of the time they do. There are some instances where they don't, and those are the situations where a student can get out of an early decision binding agreement by showing the financial aid package is not enough, or I need to know the financial aid package in order to be able to commit. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I'll let you all go back to your evening. I hope you learned something. I hope it wasn't too much information. I'll send a follow-up with the recording and all of these resources and a link to chat with me if you have more specific questions you want to work through. I'll send that. Hopefully we'll get it out by tomorrow. If not, it'll be Monday. But I hope you all have a nice evening and come see us again. Thanks, everybody. Bye.